I invite you to come with me to have a cup, not of coffee, but of coffee challenge, filled up to the rim. So I told you that it would not be the most comfortable presentation because there are some challenges we face. And um, when you put in Ellen White and coffee, you may end up on a platform for artists, and you can buy even a coffee mug, believing in the spirit of prophecy. You see, dreaming of a white Christmas coffee mug, and you just need a little bit of coffee and a lot of Jesus. This platform is for artists. Over 300,000 artists use that platform to sell the products, and they are coming from 160 plus countries. I have been a baptized member of the church for 48 years now, and it has burdened and saddened me to see this development. I have been very blessed by all the writings of the Spirit of Prophecy, but I have noticed in the past years that on one topic, we have not progressed at all. And I want to start first with the very unequivocal statements of Ellen White concerning the coffee challenge. It's why I call it also a coffee challenge. And then I will go to the research data produced by our church, and then to research data produced by the larger research community. And then the voice of your conscience is asked. What are you going to do with this contradicting information? As you can read, we have very open statements. Tea and coffee are neither wholesome nor necessary. We have to acknowledge that. They are of no use. This is a very clear statement. And you can read, it's not only a waste, it's even worse than a waste, it's a loss. They do the user only harm, and that continually. She talks about coffee and tea as narcotics. Actually, we would not use that term in our scientific language today, because narcotics are sleep-inducing and pain-killing. This is not so much the case with coffee, but it can, of course, be understood that way. And she has a clear testimony against it. And it's injurious alike to the brain and to all the other organs of the body. Now, it's interesting to see how she situates coffee in contrast to tobacco. It is not as powerful as tobacco, but it's similar in its effect. And the same arguments brought against tobacco may also be urged against the use of tea and coffee. And you always have this triad in her statements of coffee, tea, and tobacco, often together. She also states that the influence of coffee is in a degree similar to tea, but the effect is still worse. And I find it interesting that she says tea and coffee drinkers carry the marks upon their faces. We know that about alcohol, but it's interesting to have this statement also concerning tea and coffee drinkers, that you can see the marks upon their face. They are a gateway to stronger stimulants, fostering the appetite for tobacco and liquor. And I will bring some statements using the term stimulants, and we always have to include coffee. She always understands also coffee as being a stimulant. It's interesting to see the physiological description of the effects of coffee. The nerves of the stomach are excited, then comes the irritation to the brain, and from there the heart is also put into action, and there is a short-lived energy flush to the entire system. This is also an interesting statement because it shows that it has some immunological effects. It undermining the constitution, preparing the system for acute diseases. And she has an interesting description when she says, battering down her fortifications erected against disease and premature decay. So you have a systemic influence of coffee, also on probably the immune system. And this, of course, I provided the highlights in bold myself. I want to concentrate on the last thing, yeah, where it says what makes it the more dangerous is that its evil effects are so often attributed to other causes. So many don't even recognize the effects of coffee because they attribute it to other causes. Well, we have again a systemic description. The whole system suffers. Of course, she used the term of stimulants. The nerves are unbalanced and the liver is morbid. The liver is affected. Please keep that in mind when we come to the research findings we have now. The circulation and quality of the blood is affected. Skin becomes inactive and sallow. And she also mentions all the three dimensions of our humanity, saying that it's affecting us mentally, physically, and morally. And it's interesting to see how she describes it. Men and women of unsound judgment and unbalanced mind, they often manifest a hasty, impatient, accusing spirit and are utterly unable to discern their own defects. We would pretend that concerning alcohol, but it's not usual to talk about these effects of coffee. She talks about the hurtful indulgence, weakening the moral and physical powers. And I find it interesting that the activity of the brain is permanently lessened. It's not just on a short term, but on a long-term base. This is also part of the coffee challenge we face, because sad to say, many of our institutions don't follow her advice. She recommended that no tea, coffee, or flesh meat should be served in our health institutions. Only in some special case. She was also understanding of some patients, but they would only get that on their rooms. Not only should we not serve those stimulants, but she says that our sanitariums are to be the means of enlightening those who come to them for treatment. The injurious effects of tea and coffee have to be shown. So to take a proactive role even. And what burns me is that I miss enthusiasm, I miss conviction. Do we get excited about the spirit of prophecy? Are we willing to talk about these things to our patients? She goes even further. She says that we must present tea, coffee, tobacco, and alcohol as sinful indulgences. And she differentiates them from meat, eggs, and butter and cheese. The former, tea, coffee, tobacco, beer, wine, and all spirituous liquors are not to be taken moderately, but discarded. Yeah. They are not to be treated in the same way as the subject of eggs, butter, and cheese. And when I look sometimes at our health message, we are very strong on nutrition, on those items, but we totally ignore and forget about the issue of tea, coffee. And this is probably her strongest statement. It's why I put it at the last here of the whole. Tea and coffee drinking is a sin, not only an injurious indulgence. And it's not only affecting our body, it's injuring the soul. And this statement she made in 1896, because some people have pretended, yes, she may have had a change of mind from a legalistic point of view. She may have evolved to a more lenient. No, she never changed her mind on these issues. And 1896, that was after the Minneapolis GC of 1888. And we have to remember that in 1892, Steps to Christ came out. So she was already very focused on salvation by faith, on the mercy of God. And so this cannot be said that it was in the earlier days of legalistic attitude. No, she had never changed her view. And now I want to bring you some quotes concerning the coffee challenge on the spiritual aspect. I think it is very interesting too. We should not just focus on the physiology and body aspect. She says here that the tongue is loosened, their tongues are loosened. These thoughtless gossipers forget that they have a witness. All these unkind criticisms, these exaggerated reports, these envious feelings expressed under the excitement of the cup of tea. Jesus registers us against himself. It may sound pathetic, but I think it is very interesting to see that she associates the effect of the cup of tea, and we have to say, of course, that coffee has even a strong effect according to her word, so it may also include coffee. In the way we interact with other people, how it loosens our tongue. And she goes further. The drunkard sells his reason for a cup of poison. Satan takes control of his reason, affections, and conscience. Such a man is destroying the temple of God. Tea drinking helps to do the same work. And of course, coffee drinking, by implication, also quenching the divine attributes. So the effects of coffee are also on the spiritual life. We should not ignore that. Light has been given showing the injurious effects of tea and coffee and flesh meat. And we have been strong on meat, but forgot about the coffee. But this light has been disregarded even by those who profess to believe the testimonies. And why? Because they think it will be a restriction of their liberties. And this is a challenge we face, of course. There are some professed believers who accept certain portions of the testimonies as the message of God. They reject those portions as condemned, their favorite indulgence. And it's pretty stern when she says such persons are working contrary to their own welfare and the welfare of the church. So this is a challenge we face. And I don't want to do any bashing of any institutions, of people, because this is our church. God treats its church respectfully and lovingly, and we should do so also. But it is important to have a clear and straightforward word on it. This is another challenge we face. We should be at the head in the temperance reform. The reason why many of us will fall in the time of trouble is because of laxity in temperance and indulgence of appetite. So being the church of the end time, we should take it seriously. And she comes to Jesus, where she says that he overcame on the point of appetite. And there's, of course, a promise To him that overcomes will I grant to sit with me in my throne. So it is good to have all these statements together, but they constitute a challenge for us. Now, I want to address the issue of our research as a church. And there is this heroic, can I say, trial, which in the early 70s of the last century, my beloved teacher, Mervyn Harding, did. He took some Southern Californian spider, known for the orbital webs, and he injected into them the equivalent of the 2 cups of coffee for a 150-pound man, to see what effect this would have on the spider, the equivalent of caffeine injected, contained in 2 cups. So he saw that they were completely disoriented. They could not build a circular web anymore. The strings, the 30 or 35 strings that web usually counts. After 48 hours, they were still impaired. Only after 4 days were they able again to build the spider webs. Now, we may smile at that, but this was what we, as young students in the 70s, what we are presented at evangelistic campaigns with this experiment. And of course, it was a good study, an experimental study, but it does not count anymore in our evidence-based medicine. I will look at what study Loma Linda University produced. And if you open the website from Loma Linda University, with studies, you will find a few studies listed up. You have the Adventist Mortality Study, the Adventist Health Study 1 and 2, the Adventist Air Pollution Study on Religion and Health. This is in the chronologic order. The Adventist Mortality Study started in 1958, and these are all long-term comprehensive, broad studies. It involved over 23,000 study members. The Adventist Health Study number 1 started in 1974 with over 34,000. And then you had the Adventist Health Study 2 starting in 2001 with almost 100,000. The Adventist Health Air Pollution Study came out of the Health Study 1, and was just looking, of course, at air pollutants. And the Religion Health Study used participants of the Health Study number 2. And I looked a little bit at what they did, what publication database they have. So I went first to the Adventist Mortality Study and found, I looked for the studies mentioning coffee in the title. And I found just a few, so to say, I found 3 of them, as they are listed in the publication database of Loma Linda University. And there it was shown already in early 80s that there was a substantial positive association with fatal large bowel cancer. But as you know, an association is not causative, it is just a correlation. This was the second study, coffee consumption and risk of fatal cancers. And it says here in the end, in the study, there were no significant or suggested associations between coffee consumption and fatal pancreatic, breast, or ovarian cancer. So it was a little bit disappointing. Um, uh, but these were the findings. The third study I found was about done by Coffee Consumption Association with age and death and compression of mortality. And it was just a small but statistically significant association, yeah, with between coffee consumption and mortality from ischemic heart disease and cardiovascular disease and all causes of death. And the result indicated not an increase in lifespan, but a compression of mortality, because the hazard ratios came down to 1.0 around 95 years of age. But it's also consumed coffee is studied earlier. The hazard ratio was high already in earlier years of their life. When we look at the publication database of the Adventist Health Study 1, although this study was more comprehensive than the mortality study, they had 10,000 more participants. I could only find this one study. And the publication database for the health study 2 produced no study with coffee in the focus. So we have an interesting development. The interest of Loma Linda University was still good in the beginning, yeah, starting with the heroic experiment of Mervyn Harding and his spiders, but it dwindled away. The health studies got bigger and bigger, more comprehensive, but coffee somehow disappeared. That surprised me when I looked at that. Now, when we look at the scientific community at large, this is just what I'm listing here are just a few studies outside these Adventist health studies, these comprehensive studies. There was a publication done a few years ago. This is all by Loma Linda scientists. But you can see it was a small study involving only 49 subjects. And it was done on healthy people. And they compared high coffee intake as compared to decaffeinated coffee. And these were the conclusions, yeah, that there was some effect, yeah, an increase in urgency and frequency of micturition, yeah, and they compared only regular coffee with decaffeinated coffee. So it was not a very strong or very revealing study. They used the same sample, study sample, with 49 participants aged 18 to 45 to study health-related quality of life and mood and sleep. And these were the findings. Yeah, there were direct effects on sleep, anxiety, sleep quality and quantity reduction, and increase in anxiety in healthy study participants. But the conclusions are soft too. It might be beneficial for individuals with stress-responsive illness to refrain from high doses of caffeine, while our goal is to abstain completely of caffeine, not just to refrain from high doses of caffeine. Today, I looked at what is going on at the School of Public Health, the Center for Health Research. And you are listed on the right side here, the main focus of research. You see almond study, all the beans and nuts are present here. tobacco too, but nothing about coffee. This is the present state. Now, when we look at the scientific community at large, we are confronted with umbrella reviews, and somehow umbrella reviews, they review a bunch of meta-analysis. This is somehow the epitome of, in the hierarchy of evidence, the epitome you can get to prove something, to have a meta-analysis. And if you have many meta-analyses reviewed, you have an umbrella review. And I want to just mention a landmark study published in 2017. And when you look at the universities and institutions involved, it's a very prestigious study. You have the University of Catania, Cambridge, you have, of course, Harvard with 3 departments, epidemiology, nutrition, and medicine. So it's pretty tough. It's a very prestigious study, you can say. And they had selected 112 meta-analyses of observational studies. And they found out that there was a probable link and probable association with decreased risk of breast and other cancer types, even with Parkinson's disease and type 2 diabetes. They acknowledged that coffee was associated with a rise in serum lipids and a rise in blood pressure. This has been proven, of course, by pharmacological studies. But they say that many of the results are robust, and these findings indicate that coffee can be part of a healthful diet. Another study published in the same year in the British Medical Journal with a similar title, also an umbrella review. You have, they come to the same conclusion. Yeah, when we look at it, they have even interventional meta-analysis here included also. And they say that the largest relative risk reduction at intakes of 3 to 4 cups a day, yeah, include all causes of mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and so on. You can read. Even, and you look here, lower risk of several specific cancers, neurologic, metabolic, and liver conditions. And Sister White pointed out that the liver gets morbid also with the stimulants, including coffee. They acknowledged that coffee consumption was associated with low birth weight, preterm birth and pregnancy loss, and also higher risk of fracture in women, bone fracture. But the conclusion is pretty much the same. Coffee consumption seems generally safe within usual levels of intake. That means 3 to 4 cups a day. But they acknowledge still that robust randomized controlled trials are needed. Another umbrella review concerning cancer risk done by Shanghai University, 28 individual meta-analyses were included. And they concluded that highly suggestive evidence for an inverse association between coffee intake and risk of liver and endometrial cancer. You can say that's really the opposite of what the spirit of prophecy pretends, yeah, of what the spirit of prophecy says. And when you go to Johns Hopkins is not just any institution, it's a renowned institution too. And for women's health, they have listed 9 reasons why it's good to have coffee. Yeah, it's even good news. The case for coffee is stronger than ever. Coffee is chock full of substances that may help guard against conditions and so on, including Alzheimer's disease. And they mentioned the antioxidants and other active substances in coffee. This is Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And then you have the 9 benefits of drinking coffee: longer improvement of type 2 diabetes and less likely to get type 2 diabetes, less likely to develop heart failure, Parkinson's disease. So how much coffee is the optimal amount? And they conclude, yeah, it's safe for most women to drink 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day. So we have the same when we go to the School of Public Health at Harvard. And we can see here, they even describe the development. Yeah? In 1991, coffee was included in the list of possible carcinogens by the World Health Organization. By 2016, it was exonerated as research found that the beverage was not associated with an increased risk of cancer. On the contrary, there was a decreased risk of certain cancers among those who drink coffee regularly. Once smoking history was properly accounted for, they even took out the confounder of smoking. So you have a broad scientific base in favor of coffee. And Northwestern University in Illinois is also a renowned university, has produced 22 Nobel laureates and over 42 Pulitzer Prize winners. They even had a study on coffee and veggies may protect against COVID, and look at the succession of the sequence. They first put in coffee and then the veggies. So the whole scientific community actually is strong in favor of a moderate consumption of coffee. Now, I came across an interesting article, and I want you to read it because it may give you courage. It's from a guy from Reykjavik University in Iceland. And he had an interesting article because he noticed that there is some disjunction between observational and experimental findings. All the pharmacological studies done with coffee or caffeine concerning blood pressure, blood sugar, they indicate that caffeine is detrimental. Also in relation to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And he says that contradictions concerning the implication of caffeine consumption between observational and experimental research are attributable mostly to poor control over potential confounders in observational studies. And as you have noticed, all those umbrella studies mainly use observational meta-analysis. So it does not matter how many blocks you take. If the block is of poor quality, you may take 200, 400, or 1,000 of these blocks. The umbrella will always be weak if you have no control of the confounders, the potential confounders. And he concludes, when considered in the context of experimental evidence concerning caffeine's known pharmacological actions, there's reason to be skeptical about observational findings, alleging health protective effects from coffee consumption. And this is the way we need to go to have long-term randomized trials. I will come to an end. I spoke anyway already quite a long time now. And this is the text I had for my devotion a few days ago. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail, if you pay attention to the commands of the Lord. If we pay attention to the spirit of prophecy, we will not be the tail. The scientific community at the moment may think that they have the facts, but they may only have the fake. It will come out. God will not let us down. You will always be at the top, never at the bottom. And this is the challenge I present to you and to myself. What do we do? Of course, you can start digging for the truth, uh, believing what God said, what the spirit of prophecy said, but then you become indifferent and you fall asleep, or you cannot bear it anymore, you want to get out, or you get distracted. But we need to keep going. Don't forget the first vision, the first revelation on health reform, E.G. White received in 1848, and it was about tobacco, alcohol, and coffee. She was warned about these substances. And only in 1863 did she receive her great health reform vision. And it may be so that what was put first by God in his revelation will be vindicated last by science in those days. But we need to trust the Lord. E.G. White was vindicated in all other fields, and why should we lose our hope? We may be very close, and we should not give up on our convictions. And I want you to get excited and work on it, to stick to what the spirit of prophecy tells us, but maybe we can also put something into to get something going, that also the coffee challenge will be solved. Thank you very much for your patience and for your interest.